What is going on, Only Playbook fans? We are back for another episode. Offseason in full swing. Combine is over, so a lot to talk about. But today, we want to talk a little bit about the quarterback carousel around the NFL. Show that there are places that need teams that need quarterbacks. There's quarterbacks that are trying to find homes. We had one giant trade shakeup already for a quarterback that we didn't think was going to be on the move, Geno Smith, going from the Seahawks to the Raiders. So you go to a team that we were going to talk about needing a quarterback, and now it opens up a vacancy for a team that we weren't coming into this expecting to have a quarterback vacancy. So that was a little bit of a kind of out of left field, if you will, but reunite with Pete Carroll. So it definitely makes sense. But I want to talk a little bit about, obviously, the entire landscape of the NFL. We can go over the teams that need quarterbacks and who you and I each think would be a good fit or what they should do in terms of the quarterback position heading into the 2025 season. Any thoughts to that Geno Smith trade, Shovit?
That was surprising, but I mean, it makes sense. Pete Carroll, I guess, he wants the guy that he's comfortable with. I think they were trying to get DK Metcalf as well, and they were trying to Seahawks were trying to get Max Crosby, so that didn't go through. But I guess it's like a good step, like a middle ground per se. Like you know what you can get with Geno Smith. He's an accurate quarterback. He can run the ball as well, get you some wins here and there. Probably doesn't push the needle to get you a Super Bowl, but I think it's a good middle ground for right now, where the quarterback class isn't as strong, and maybe later on you can build on some of these guys like Jackson Dart or other guys that are in the later rounds for QBs, or shop for QBs next year or the year after. So I think it's a good spot for the Raiders to be in right now.
Yeah, I think there's two ways they could have gone, right? I mean, if you go into the season with Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell, which they have let Minshew know they're going to release him, so he's going to be a free agent as well. You could go into the season like that, which means Pete Carroll, first year head coach, at least for the Raiders, you kind of know that this is a losing season. You're going to try to rebuild. You're going to try to, probably tank for a good quarterback, or you're going to bring in a veteran. So they already knew that this season was going to be a wash from a quarterback standpoint. So again, you could risk that, or you could try to bring somebody in that can give you a win now opportunity. I mean, Geno's 35, so it still doesn't preclude them from drafting a future quarterback if they wanted to this draft. It's just going to be about where the cards fall and where the chips fall in free agency. And if they feel like they do enough to sign players to potentially build around Geno for this year and try to go all in, then maybe they don't draft a quarterback, right? Maybe they use that 6th pick to trade back, maybe, or get more ammo to be able to pick up some more talent and build around Geno and try to win now. But again, it doesn't preclude them from potentially taking a quarterback. So I don't hate it. It just, to me, from a Seattle perspective, is weird, right? Like, you're going from, you have somebody at quarterback, at least for the short term, to now you have no certainty at quarterback. You are in the midst of trading DK Metcalf, like he's in the open market for a trade. You have a young JSN. So are they trying to rebuild, get younger? Like, I'm not able to gauge what the logic from the Seahawks standpoint is, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, they have the 18th pick, right? So it's not like top 10 where you can get a guy like Cam Ward or Shedeurs and be confident in next year as that's going to be your quarterback that you're going to go and start with, because I don't know if the other guys are startable day one. Yeah, I mean, maybe this is where they look at some of the guys that are available, and we'll talk about them. Like, we have the likes of Sam Darnold, or even Kirk Cousins, who's kind of in this mix now with Falcons. He's like basically demanding a trade from the Falcons, right? So yeah, I think maybe they'll try to go down the route of picking somebody else up, but it's like, well, why didn't you just kind of stay with Geno Smith? So I get what you're saying with that too. Yeah.
It's like, you knew it was kind of a 1-year window, right? If they didn't want to extend him, they could have just used him and played one more year and try to compete that way. And then however the chips fall, then you draft a quarterback next year. Or like you said, maybe you take a flyer on another guy to be the backup and then learn under Geno and then be the starter next year. So really interesting there. But yeah, again, one big domino falls. A domino that we weren't even expecting to fall has kind of transpired, and that leaves the vacancy for Seattle. So let's do it, Shove It. Let's run down the list of the teams. There's enough teams that it's obvious who the quarterback is, so this should be a pretty quick exercise. But if you're watching on YouTube, we've got the slideshow presentation, so you can at least follow along with us a little bit on the screen. So first things first, we'll start with the AFC North. Shove It, the Buffalo Bills. Do you think there's a world where Josh Allen isn't the quarterback for the Buffalo Bills?
Hell no. Like, impossible.
Yeah, impossible. Absolutely impossible. The Miami Dolphins, I think at this point, it's pretty impossible that they're going to move off of Tua Tagovailoa. The contract, the way they build that team, Tyreek saying, retracing his words and saying he's coming back. I don't think they're doing all that if they're going to somehow trade Tua, right, and get younger or try to develop another quarterback. So I think Tua's etched in stone, at least for Miami this year. Would you agree?
Yeah, agreed. I mean but they could definitely try to get a quarterback in this draft, like
Mhm.
we talked about the Raiders and Seahawks later down the line as a backup for Tua, because Skylar Thompson and any of these backups that they have
No.
just don't pan out. Like it's terrible. It's a different team
Backups
without.
that can't come into the game in spot starts and be serviceable should not be backups, right? They should not be in the NFL. So we saw Skylar Thompson come in and just be completely incapable of running this
Right.
offense. Tyler Huntley came in completely incapable of running this offense. So you're right. They need to be in the market for somebody because we know the injury concerns for Tua, and it's short-term and long-term, right? You draft a guy like Jackson Dart, he can be your project. And if Tua has another concussion, you have somebody that you can at least throw in there and he's going to learn on the fly, if you will. So I agree with you. They could be an interesting team to take a flyer on a quarterback in the later rounds for sure. All right, here the first big one that we kind of have a open vacancy show of it. The New York Jets have informed Aaron Rodgers that they are moving on from him. They have Tyrod Taylor as their backup quarterback. There was a rumor that came out saying that they aren't uncomfortable with the idea of running Tyrod Taylor out there this year, knowing that he is a very serviceable backup. Maybe it's not the highest, it's the best quarterback class. You're drafting 7th overall, I believe. So Cam Ward most likely will be gone. There could be a chance that Shedeur is still there. It's just about if you value him at the 7th overall pick, if you potentially trade down. So I'll let you take the floor first. What is your mindset for the New York Jets? Where do you think the optimal spot for them would be to kind of pivot to a quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, the rumors and what I've seen so far is Justin Fields. I've seen that they really like, it's his athleticism, what he brings to the run game. And, he finished last year with a 4-2 record until Russell Wilson came in and took the show there. But I think Justin Fields is a serviceable quarterback. I think that, he's going to give you a competitive drive with the Jets. And I think they need that. It's a change from, I mean, with Aaron Rodgers, you had 5 wins. I know you're comparing an old Aaron Rodgers to Justin Fields, who's still young, right? He's 25 years old. So I think he would be an interesting fit for the Jets. Outside of that, while you have Tyrod Taylor, maybe Jameis Winston as like a backup. He's just the guy that's been, he comes in, he throws touchdowns. He also throws interceptions, but he's like that guy in the locker room that can really kind of get a team going per se. So I think Fields and Winston are the 2 guys that I'm thinking they may try to target here in the free agency.
Justin Fields is definitely not a bad option for the Jets, in my opinion, either. If they try to get Fields and then they really go completely in the deep end in terms of creating a run-first offense, you have 2 really good running backs in Brees and Braylon. And so if you run a similar type of running-first offense with a run-first quarterback who is an absolute freak, at least with his legs, you at least create competitiveness for your team. You're running the football. You're controlling time of possession. They may not have the craziest offense, obviously, because they're not going to be throwing the football a ton, but I think there is a world in which that can work. I think personally what the Jets are going to do is you have first-year head coach in Aaron Glenn. So the good thing for him is because they don't have like a quarterback ready in the wings, his clock as a head coach, in my opinion, is not ticking. So like if they start Tyrod Taylor this year and they go 1-16, Aaron Glenn's not going to be a threat to get fired, in my opinion, right? So he is basically playing a year on house money. So what I think ideally is going to happen here is I don't think he's going to shy away from letting Tyrod be the guy to go into the season with, because they don't want to hamper themselves long-term in terms of cap with a quarterback that they know may not be the future. So you look at guys who could sign long-term extensions. There's no world where Sam Darnold's going back to New York, right? I think that is just a complete no-no. Yeah. Aaron Rodgers is out there. I don't think Russell Wilson, I don't think is a good fit for the Jets either, because just too old. So you look at guys, Kirk Cousins, I don't see him going to the Jets either. Just kind of, again, on that age scale, if you're going to go with Kirk, you could have just kept Aaron Rodgers. So I'm trying to weigh out who would make sense there. And I think what realistically makes sense is Aaron Glenn being in a position where he's like, we want to fortify the way I want to build a team. So I'm okay keeping Tyrod Taylor. But what I do think could happen is they could draft a quarterback in the later rounds. We've seen so many mocks now show it that talk about Shedeur Sanders falling. It seems so incomprehensible because we know how valuable the quarterback position is and how teams can jump for quarterbacks. We saw the Steelers do it with Kenny Pickett, and where is he now 3 years later, right? So if you value Shedeur Sanders as a better prospect than Kenny Pickett, there's going to be a team that's going to jump at taking him at least in the first round so they get that extra 5th-year option. So I'm looking at a situation where I think the Jets have the opportunity. They won't draft Shedeur at 7. I think Shedeur falls, but could the Jets trade back up into the latter part of the first round to secure Shedeur, knowing that they can at least build behind somebody and have Tyrod being kind of the mentor for him. That is what I see happening for the Jets. I think they roll with Tyrod. They draft a quarterback of the future. If he's not Shador or Cam, he's a flyer, which means you only need like 1-2 years and you can move off of him being like, hey, we drafted Dart in the third round. Third round quarterbacks are usually projects. If he didn't work, you can immediately go back into the draft next year or the year after and draft another quarterback behind Tyrod Taylor. So that's what I think the Jets are going to do. But I'm with you. I don't hate the Fields thing. The only reason why I was off of Fields is I felt like Fields was a better fit for another team that we'll talk about a little bit later. So that's where my mind was at with the Jets. The Patriots shove it. Drake May, pretty easy, right? You drafted him last year. He's obviously your quarterback going into next year.
Right.
All right. The Ravens, pretty simple. You have Lamar Jackson. He's going to be your quarterback next year. The Steelers shove it. This is so interesting. And before I even speak, there's so many perspectives from your side I want to get, right? First, as a fan, what you think in your mind you would do. Secondly, as just a logical consumer of football, knowing that the two quarterbacks you had last year and who would make most sense to bring back this year, if at all, those two guys. And three, what your rumblings as a Steelers fan on like Twitter and all the news space is telling you could potentially happen. So kind of a little bit of three different ways to take that, but I want you to take the floor first here.
Yeah, I mean, so first off, it looks like Russell Wilson is not coming back. And
okay,
that's they're going to move on from Russell Wilson,
and you're okay with that, given the nature of what your options are.
Yes, I'm okay with that. I think he started off strong, but at the end, I mean, only averaging 13 points per game on offense, like that's not going to cut it, right? And it's probably not all his fault, but just not a lot of playmakers on receivers. There's a lot going on there as well, but it's just we've got to move on for Russell Wilson. He's not getting any younger. I think, and the talks with Justin Fields recently came out, beat writer from the Steelers, I forget his name right now, but he also said that the talks between Justin Fields and Steelers are not going well. I think Fields probably wants a little bit more than what the Steelers are comfortable giving him because it was just a 1-year contract last year, right? He was coming out of the rookie contract with the Bears, so I don't think the Steelers are comfortable with paying him and keeping him long term, given that we have only seen like a little bit of Justin Fields.
Doesn't that seem ridiculous for Fields camp and Fields to be asking for something like that, given what you just said? We've seen next to nothing from him for him to be a multi-year starter.
Yeah, I mean, and that's it's unfortunate for Fields camp, but it's business at the end of the day. You don't know what you're going to get with Justin Fields in terms of the accuracy, being able to command a team, and all of that on a 17 games like playing field. You just don't know, right? Mm-hmm. I still think now what I think should happen is they should try to come to an agreement. Justin Fields should be a guy that's there for now. And then there are some guys that are rising in the draft that I've kind of been looking at. One of them is the quarterback from Notre Dame. Riley Leonard. He looked good on the combine. Also quarterback for Louisville, Schultz, I believe.
Yeah. Shucks. Tyler Shuck. Yeah.
Yeah, and he also looked really well, right? These are guys like late, probably 4th and 5th round picks, and I'm like, you know what? Like, let's try to see if we can get those. I wouldn't say go out and try to get the 1st and 2nd pick for Ward and Shadurs. Try to see if you can get something out of those guys. I like their accuracy. I like their poise. And I look at their highlights. In terms of being able to throw the ball, both of those guys can throw the ball. And Riley Leonard can also run the ball as well. He's and both of them, Shucks had a 4.6 40 time as well. So lots of things to like about these late quarterbacks, in my opinion, that you stick with Fields and then draft a quarterback later rounds is what I would go for. But we'll see what happens. I'm curious what you think.
So, I've gone to every aspect for the Steelers. I've played out every scenario in terms of all the quarterbacks they could get in my brain to try to understand logically what would make most sense, right? Aaron Rodgers, Mike Tomlin, hear me out. Mike Tomlin, the 500 record, the constantly over 500 is insanely impressive. But at some point, like you said, he's getting some noise from the Steelers fans, right or wrong, right? Whether you think he should be gone because of his lack of high level or whether you think he deserves to stay because he's so goddamn consistent, there is still rumbling. So I think there is a sense of a little bit of pressure on Tomlin to be like, do I want to try to swing for another Sam Darnold with 15-game sample size? I don't know. You have to pay him a multi-year contract. We've seen what Russell Wilson did last year. It's another pretty much similar to what I do with any quarterback, right? Justin Fields, similar to what I think I'm going to do with any quarterback. Which quarterback this year gives me the highest upside to potentially outperform what I think we could do? I think it's Aaron Rodgers. And I think the reason why I think it's Aaron Rodgers is if you get a package duo like he's always been, with you get Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, bro, you have Devontae Adams, George Pickens, and now Roman Wilson coming back healthy, playing the slot, which Aaron Rodgers loves his slot guy, by the way. So I think he could absolutely feast. You probably, I mean, your offensive line's not terrible. You may want to shore that up in the draft. But I think if Tomlin and the Steelers, because there's really no quarterback to be like, I could see a future of building 4 or 5 years with this guy. It's just not the DNA right now of the Steelers, specifically given where they're at. I think Aaron Rodgers actually makes the most sense to the Steelers because it gives them the best chance to potentially try to win now. I don't think they're going to win with Rodgers because it's really difficult to be in a division with all those quarterbacks, to be in a conference with all those elite quarterbacks. But who do I think gives them the best chance? And who do I think actually, if they bring Aaron Rodgers in, I think for the time being, Steelers land's noise will quiet down for Tomlin. And I think that will also grant them the ability to be like, hey, we swung for Rodgers, so we can't fault Tomlin for what's the alternative? Try to swing for a quarterback that in the draft is not, the guy yet because they're not the best players in the quarterback draft this year. So I think that makes the most sense. I think the fan base will forgive the Steelers and Tomlin should that go south, because we kind of already know what to expect with Rodgers, but we also know the high-end upside could still be there with them, especially if he brings Devontae Adams. So Pittsburgh, win now. You're drafting 21st. You still have kind of a good roster if you just maybe draft another cornerback and ensure up the offensive line. I think Aaron Rodgers makes the most sense. Now, cancer, locker room, all that stuff, I didn't take any of that into account, but if there's one guy, if there's one coach that I think can, be like, let's let our bygones be bygones. Let's put all that shit aside and let's try to actually make this work. It's Mike Tomlin. So I don't know if Aaron Rodgers obliges to that side, but that's the way I see it.
It's unfortunate that the fans are seeing it this way and are saying Mike Tomlin is this and that. Cause at the end of the day, he's a great coach. And
they're hard to come by. They're so hard to come by.
He will bring the best out of a player. Right. And that's no questions about it. And you're right. When you get a guy like Aaron Rodgers from the free agency, you can then get a running back, which you desperately need if we're not going to pay Najee Harris or Jalen Warren, right? Or a receiver that we need as a number 2 for George Pickens, and a cornerback as well. So you make your team better, but my only issue is, like you said, the issue with the locker room with Aaron Rodgers. Like it's just so much drama, and he did produce though, over 3,500 yards and 25 touchdowns. So it's not like he was terrible last year, but only 5. If you mark it with wins, it's only 5 wins, right? So that's my concern with Rodgers. But I get that. I get why they would do that as well.
Yeah. I just think logically that seems to make the most sense. The other option is I don't know why I don't envision the Steelers going into a full rebuild, like drafting a quarterback and being like, hey, you're young, you're going to be our star. Like, I just don't see that with them this year because there's not a quarterback. You're not going to be able to get Cam Ward. You could possibly get Shedeur if he falls, right? But again, even that, people are talking about Shedeur should not be a day one starter. And I agree. There's so much he needs to still learn. And if he's behind a bad offensive line or even just a average offensive line, he's gonna struggle. So I just think it's so uncanny, but sometimes you have like what are two opposites attract, but it's like I'm talking about like when you're mixing liquids and it's like oil and water, and you're mixing oil and water. And sometimes for whatever reason, it can create something that you weren't expecting. And for some reason, I just think Rodgers to the Steelers could create some chaos and some cool noise, similar to like a Brett Favre 09 to the Vikings, like unexpected, unconventional, but wow, like I'm in for a ride and I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, we're just going to be like the Jets from last year, right? Rodgers going to come. Devontae Adams is going to come. We have
Lazard.
Poor man Breece Hall. Braylon Allen was like, it's just maybe
except Tomlin, bro. Tomlin.
You're right.
All right, so moving on. Bengals, Joe Burrow, pretty easy. Let's move on from that one. Browns, Browns. We already know their shit show situation with Deshaun Watson. He's obviously still under contract. He's obviously still under a lot of allegations. The word is that they don't want to start him. So Kevin Stefanski is in a very, very interesting position because they don't have a lot of money to go out and get a guy. They are picking second. So they could absolutely draft a quarterback of the future to build around and just obviously throw him into the wolves. But I'll start first. I felt like if they do draft a quarterback, which they could, it makes the most sense for if the Falcons grant Kirk Cousins his release to go to Cleveland and reunite with Kevin Stefanski. I think the best parts about Kirk Cousins was his ability to in play action, right? And Kevin Stefanski is a run first and a play action machine. Now, why Kirk Cousins struggled last year and why maybe they didn't run as much play action is because maybe his Achilles wasn't 100%. I think he had he's one of the most successful play action quarterbacks of all time, and he had the least amount of play action plays last year. So is that Raheem Morris and the Falcons offense just designing plays differently than what Kirk is used to? Or is that them trying to design plays for Kirk and then seeing that all those 7 5-step drops on play action, his Achilles couldn't quite execute the way we needed to? If the Achilles was not the issue, I think Stefanski's a perfect fit here because, again, you know what you're getting with Kirk. He's going to be super cheap because the Falcons are going to have to cut him and eat up all their money, which means the Browns can take him on and still have Deshaun Watson there eating up all that money and get Kirk for, pennies on the dollar. And then you have basically a 1-year stopgap. And you could draft a quarterback and try to have him learn behind, or you could just let Kirk ride it out and then go into the draft next year. But at 2, you have the ability to draft a dual Carter. You have the ability to draft Travis Hunter. I just don't think that they're going to die on a hill of taking the second best quarterback if the first pick is Cam Ward. I don't think number 2 is going to be Shedeur Sanders just because the Browns need a quarterback. So I think they sign Kirk Cousins and then potentially they draft a quarterback later, or they just play out Kirk Cousins and then draft a quarterback next year.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting. If I were the Browns, I'd be very scared to get Kirk Cousins because you just went through this whole Deshaun Watson scenario and then like the injuries, and now you have Kirk Cousins dealing with an Achilles injury. So, I mean, he came back last year, he played, but then he got benched, and it was an okay year for Kirk Cousins. So I think if you're betting on getting something from Kirk Cousins, it's going to be interesting. We'll see if that will happen. But there's another part of this where the Atlanta Falcons have said that they will do what's best for the organization. Now, if that means a trade, I don't know if the Cleveland Browns will trade anything for Kirk Cousins.
No.
But if it's a scenario where they do cut him and you can do what the Steelers did with Russell Wilson, like the minimum, money to pick contract for Kirk Cousins, then I think it's a good option there. But I don't know. I'm not sure if they will actually end up cutting him or not. I know they save a lot of cap space after maybe June 1st or something like that. But this one's tough. I'm leaning that they actually go and draft a quarterback, either Shedeur. If they can get the first pick, Cam Ward, I think that's what they'll end up doing because Kirk Cousins just seems like too much of a risk, personally, for me.
Yeah. No, I agree. They have to toy the line between like thinking about long-term future and also like how can we put a product on the field next year that's not Deshaun Watson, so the whole fan base is booing every time he steps onto the field. So it's a really, and it's so Cleveland. It's just such a Cleveland Browns problem to have or situation to be in. It's really, really unfortunate. But I just think the Stefanski Cousins combination, because they've already worked together, that's the only connection that I'm making there that would make sense for him. And he wants to. It clearly seems like he still wants to play and try to be a starting quarterback. So I don't see him just staying and being like, I'll be your backup Penix, or coming to Minnesota and being like, hey, I'll be your backup JJ McCarthy. I don't see that happening for Kirk. That's why I think he's going to try to go somewhere where he can play.
Yeah, makes sense.
Texans, CJ Stroud, pretty obvious. Let's move on from that. So this one doesn't have a question mark next to it, Shovit, but there is a ton of question marks around this. Colts and Anthony Richardson. Do you have any thoughts here? Do you think they have to run Richardson out next year and just be like, this is your prove it year. If you're not the guy, we have to move on, but we need you to give us 17 games. We need to see you give us enough of a sample size to make that decision. Or are you going into the season with that, but knowing that if they need to pivot, the Colts have a pretty good roster to where they want a serviceable backup that can come in and get the job done if Richardson, again, still isn't that guy. Where do you lean there?
Yeah, they have to tell Richardson that this is your last year and you gotta, or I'm sure he knows, right? Like at this point, he hasn't played a full 17 game season. This is his 3rd year and it's kind of break it or break it. Get your accuracy down, start being more accurate and stop getting injured and putting your body out there. So those are 2 things that he needs to change on. But I think they're definitely going to be looking for a backup option. I'm looking at a guy like Daniel Jones. And I know also injury prone, also like not injury prone, but he gets hurt.
But yeah.
But maybe he's a guy that they can come in because Daniel Jones did have that one good year with the Giants where he played well. And so, maybe Shane Steichen can bring that out of Daniel Jones. Anyone that's some of the other guys, I feel like the other players that are available in free agency all want to be starters. So going into the Colts, you're kind of saying that I'm okay with being a backup. And I feel like the only quarterback that would be comfortable with that right now is Daniel Jones. So I think that's where that they would probably try to target him in the free agency.
I don't hate that. Actually, for some reason, I hadn't even thought of Daniel Jones, but I think it makes a ton of sense because if you're Shane Steichen, your whole idea is that how can we create an offense around Anthony Richardson because this is the investment, right? Who is a quarterback that can at least somewhat run, like not like Richardson, but can run, right? So that can probably orchestrate an offense where you're trying to design it for a quarterback who's run first. Daniel Jones, right? He can run the football. We talk about his straight line speed. So he is able to bring that element that I think the Colts don't have to completely take out of their playbook that they inserted for Anthony Richardson. So I like the fit there. And again, I know Daniel Jones isn't a great quarterback and obviously his recipe for success, he was pretty much put to fail because he was not supposed to be a top 10 quarterback drafted. The Giants took him 5 or 6 overall, and the rest is history. But do I think Daniel Jones could be a very one of the best backup quarterbacks or a very serviceable spot start guy as long as he's in a good situation? Absolutely, I do. So I do think this is a good fit. I think this gives the Colts a pretty nice floor, because the rest of their roster is pretty damn talented. And I think it allows you to see what you have with Richardson, but pivot if you need to with a guy that obviously can go in there and win you football games or at least play sufficiently. I spent some time thinking if we should debate this because I still think this is somewhat of a debate, but we're not for the sake of this. Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence, you're kind of stuck with him. Even though the numbers are alarming, I saw a stat that compared all of his numbers to, I think, either Mac Jones or Daniel Jones from when they entered the league as starters, and you'd be surprised at how similar they are. But we view Trevor Lawrence in such a completely different lens. But for the sake of this exercise, he's got to come back next year, right? First year head coach, Liam Cohen, they kind of have to roll with Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah. Also kind of make it break it, I feel like.
I agree. Would not be surprised is if halfway into the season or after the season, he is somebody that surprise trade, goes to another team, different offensive coordinator, things like that. So Tennessee Titans shove it. They are taking the first overall pick. They have Will Levis. They have control. They could go out and sign a free agent if they want. They have the money. They can keep Will Levis, obviously, because they still have him, and they have the number 1 pick. So if they want to take Cam Ward and say, fuck all, they can. So really, the ball's in their court. Where do you see the Titans kind of playing this situation out?
Yeah, I think Pro Day is going to be interesting for Cam Ward and see how that play pans out for them. I think that they will go out and get Cam Ward, but if there's other trades out there that seem a little bit, juicy and they get the first round pick next year, I could see them trading down as well. But as of right now, I don't think they go out and get any of the free agents that we talked about. It's either get Cam Ward or, trade down and kind of reassess from there.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of what they have to do. The nice thing is they have all options. And first year head coach, not really a first year head coach, but for them, Mike Vrabel, right? And I think anytime you're in this situation where you are coming into a situation where the hands have been dealt for you, he can't go wrong. He can be like, hey, last regime gave me Will Levis. We're going to let him see what he's got one more year, final year, right? Or last regime gave me Will Levis. He's clearly shown he's incapable, inconsistent. I want 1 year where I could try to go all in. Let's bring in Rodgers. Let's bring in Devontae Adams. We'll go all in 1 year. And this is basically like my house money year, similar to potentially Aaron Glenn, right? Where you can take Rodgers' flyer. If it doesn't work out, then you're completely rebuilding next year. And you're doing that on the back of the number 1 pick, which you took was, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, somebody who's a cornerstone for your team moving forward. So I agree with you. The domino effect of what the Titans do is really going to change the landscape of the entire NFL. And I wouldn't be surprised if they go in any direction. But for the sake of this exercise, I say that they personally stick with Levis, take the best player on the board, and then they try to see if Levis has it 1 more year. They bring in a veteran backup if necessary, and then they go for a quarterback next year.
The reason I say no to Levis is Brian Callahan and Levis just basically, they just... You could see him visibly upset when he was throwing some of those picks that were like, why are you throwing into 2-man coverage and things like that? So I feel like he's ready to move on and start fresh, but we'll see.
Yeah, no. I absolutely agree with you there. The benefit for them is even if they're in a shitty quarterback situation, they control their own cards, being the number 1 overall pick and having the money and having Levis. Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, pretty obvious. Chargers, Justin Herbert, pretty obvious. Broncos, Bo Nix, pretty obvious. Raiders, made it obvious now for us. Yep. They traded for Geno Smith. Again, 35-year-old Geno Smith. Will they potentially extend him? Will Carroll extend Geno Smith and let him, have a 3-year contract similar to Carroll's contract so they're kind of joined at the hip and they can run this thing together? Or is this a 1 year, I knew you, at least it's a competent quarterback, it's not O'Connell or Minshew, and then we can take, it year by year after that? Do you think Carroll's kind of hitching his wagon with Geno for 3 years, or is it going to be a 1 year and then they're going to move on?
I think you have to be 1 year at this point.
Yeah. He'll be 36. At that point, who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Eagles, Jalen Hurts, obvious. Commanders, Jaden Daniels, obvious. Cowboys, Dak Prescott, I guess obvious. Giants, this is an interesting one. No quarterback. They have no quarterback. Brian Daboll is on the hot seat. Joe Shane is on the hot seat. I don't know how many years or even a whole year is if Brian Daboll has that in him. So what are the Giants going to do here to be competitive? Their roster's pretty sus. So it's not like you could go out and get Rodgers, but how much does that really help your overall team? Like, it just gives you the idea that you're trying to compete this year, but the rest of the roster is kind of sus. I think they're in one of the most kind of like lose spots, if you will, because Daboll's on the hot seat. You could go young, but there's really not a guy at 6 if Cam goes that you feel great about, considering where Shadur's consensus ranking is. Or again, you can hitch your wagon on Aaron Rodgers, stays in New York, brings Devontae Adams over, but who knows what that looks like. I think for the Giants, they're going to go the veteran route. Rodgers makes sense here because, again, Daboll's on the hot seat. I don't think they can hitch their wagon to Shadur and be like, give us another 3 years. They don't have the luxury of that time.
Yeah, I mean, talk about an organization that messed up, right? You had between Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley, and you went with Daniel Jones to pay him, and now Saquon Barkley won a championship with the Eagles. So they're on the hot seat, and they really need to turn the ship around. I think they need to show that they are going to be competitive next year, and one of the only few options I think that they can do that is with Aaron Rodgers. Or a guy like Kirk Cousins. I think those two are the only options where, you're looking at a quarterback that you're like more Kirk Cousins than Aaron Rodgers. I don't really know which one I lean more of, honestly. That it's a toss up at this point, but I think you have to just try your best to get as most wins as you can next year, save your face. And hopefully Aaron Rodgers, maybe Devontae Adams or Kirk Cousins, captain on that team, will bring them to wins. And, the Art Stapleton was in the Pat McAfee show and said that the Aaron Rodgers and Giants may be close to a deal. So I think that's going to be the most likely outcome for the Giants.
I think they're so desperate that it has to be the only outcome, right? I mean, they have to prove to their fan base that they're trying to win now. And the only quarterback that gives you that option is Aaron Rodgers, in my opinion. It could be Kirk. You're right. It could totally be Kirk. I just think with Aaron Rodgers, he's going to bring Devontae Adams. With Kirk, he's not bringing anybody else. So Malik Neighbors as one wide receiver there is really not going to do anything for them. But the minute you bring Rodgers and Adams, and now you have them playing alongside Malik Neighbors, maybe it changes things a little bit. So I think that's the logical. But I think the Giants franchise is kind of in a doom and gloom where I don't know how Daboll makes it out beyond this season.
Yeah, and the GM. I don't know how he.
Yes, and Joe Shane. Exactly. Yeah. I think it's going to be like a conjoined firing. Like, see you guys, we're cleaning house. Lions, Jared Goff seems pretty obvious. Vikings, JJ McCarthy now with the writing on the wall. Sam Darnold most likely on his way out. It making no sense for them to pay Sam Darnold with McCarthy already being drafted there. I think that's a pretty solid bet. Packers, Jordan Love, pretty safe. Bears, Caleb Williams is safe. Bucks, Baker Mayfield, pretty obvious. Falcons, now they thrusting Michael Penix last year, benching Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins not looking good. Pretty safe to say Penix is who they're going to roll with this year. Bryce Young, obviously going to be who the Panthers roll with this year. Now, the Saints, Shove. The Saints recently just said that they are going to pay Derek Carr, let him play out his contract. So it sounds like Derek Carr is going to be their starting quarterback in 2025, whether they like it or not.
Yep. Yeah. And I think they want to stick with Carr, see one more year. Also a team that could go out and get a quarterback later in the late rounds. I don't see them drafting, with the recent changes and restructure of the contract to Derek Carr, I don't see them going up in the draft boards to pick a quarterback, but later in the rounds, they may, draft a player.
Yeah, and they still do have Rattler, so he is still there as a potential project, which we saw. You just really don't know what to expect anymore with those guys. Rams, they gave us some sort of a scare. They were trying to play with our emotions, but no, Matthew Stafford came back, so they are set. Let me fit the Cardinals, Kyler Murray. The 49ers are an interesting one. Let me get back to them. But the Seahawks, we talk about the Seahawks. They are what now it seems like, based on all the rumors swirling, because they traded away Geno Smith, it seems like Sam Darnold is the most logical fit there because they are looking for a multi-year starter, somebody that isn't completely young, not a completely old quarterback either. Mike McDonald is a newer head coach. They're looking to trade DK Metcalf. So it seems like maybe their window is like that 26, 27-year-old range, which DK is. So they could easily, if they bring Darnold back, they could keep DK and try to build around Darnold. But if in fact they do trade DK or whatever, I just think right now with the Seahawks, Sam Darnold makes the most sense because they're not drafting in the top 10. They're not going to be able to draft a quarterback unless they trade up or they take a flyer on a young guy who hasn't proved anything compared to what Darnold has at least proven this year. I just think that makes the most sense. Sam Darnold to Seattle. All the rumors are saying that. So logically, I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think if you're the Sam Darnold camp, you have a lot of ammo to use and say, "Hey, look at my last season. Yes, I had tough last two games, right? The playoff and the last game of the season against the Lions. Yeah, that was bad, but I was an MVP candidate for most of for in the half of the season, right? Like people were considering me as the comeback player of the year, things like of that sort. So I think that he has a lot of ammo, and in terms of being able to be successful in the Vikings offense, pass heavy, Seattle's kind of trying to go down that route where he's a Washington coach, that three receiver type of mentality, that personnel. So I think that if Sam Darnold was able to be successful in Vikings, they can kind of take that and use that in Seattle, and that might be the best fit. So yeah, the Sam Darnold of Seattle makes the most sense here.
Yeah, they have what they'd put him around a really good team. I think what Seattle's going to have to do is they'd have to bolster their interior offensive line. That was their weakest part of their team last year. And what we saw from Sam Darnold in the two games he struggled is the Vikings interior offensive line struggled as well. So you saw the guards and the centers getting blown up, and that interior pressure is what caused Sam Darnold to hold the football so long. So I think if he goes to Seattle, that's got to be the biggest thing that they try to bolster, bringing Sam Darnold in. But you're right. They have the weapons. I think if Sam Darnold comes there, it doesn't make sense to trade away DK unless you're going to trade him for a second rounder and then turn right around and use that second rounder on a wide receiver. Because why would you not have enough weapons or more than enough weapons for a new quarterback you're bringing in rather than depleting that array of weapons that he would have? So I think bringing Sam Darnold in, bringing DK Metcalf back. If not, you trade DK and you draft another receiver. He's going to go into a situation where he has good running backs, good receivers, and they're going to bolster that interior offensive line. So he should be in a similar situation to at least have some success that he did in Minnesota. Okay, 49ers. I thought this was obvious, so I thought we were just going to brush this off. But I read a report saying that the 49ers don't know if they're going to pay Brock Purdy, that they could be looking to try to get out of that contract or get out of paying him by trading him. And then Kyle Shanahan would have his pick of either Sam Darnold, similar offense, was the backup. He knows what he's going to expect. He was their backup, and he learned a lot off of them. Or Kirk Cousins, the guy that Kyle Shanahan for years has been enamored with, that's been wanting, saying he would run his offense perfectly, give them a 1 year win now all in with Kirk Cousins, or a 3 year gap with Sam Darnold. I think that is so interesting. That could completely change, again, the landscape more so than we're expecting, which I don't even want to bring this up, but I also thought that there was a world where the Cardinals could potentially shop Kyler Murray, because that's been going on for quite some time. No success. He's still got value. So, you could potentially be like, we've tried and it's not working. We need to move on. Let's see what we can get from him. He is another dark horse candidate for me to get traded. But that's where the Brock Purdy situation became really, really interesting is, yeah, he's a Mr. Irrelevant. So do you want to pay him, $60 million a year? Or do you want to be like, thanks for the memories, man. We got to the Super Bowl. We didn't win. And now we're trading away Debo. Ayuk is on the trade block where McCaffrey's like 40, has no calves. We need to be kind of in a rebuild mode. We want to replenish what we have, see what we can get for somebody we drafted with the last pick in the draft. Or are we going to try to run it back with Brock Purdy with less weapons?
Man, I think you probably should try to keep Brock Purdy. I think the system is complicated. And if you wanted to keep Sam Darnold, you would have, because he was there, right, prior to going to the Vikings, and he would have still been the backup there, and the Vikings, I think, traded for him, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure how they got him. But anyways, he would have already been there. I think you have to stick with Brock Purdy. He works in the system. Sometimes his accuracy is not great, but he also took you to the Super Bowl, and he's a leader on that team. So I don't know if there's a better option out there, but I like entertaining the thought that Brock Purdy could be traded. That's fun.
It's just scary to be the 49ers and be like, we're paying $60 million a year for a Mr. Irrelevant quarterback.
Sure.
The opportunity cost of what we could get back for what we paid for him, and then in turn, potentially get somebody else, get out of that contract. But if you pay him, then you're locked on to Purdy for the next 4 or 5 years. Again, while you're in the midst of losing and recycling your star-studded receiver, your star-studded running back. So it's just like re-signing Brock Purdy puts them in a window where they don't have a ton of weapons around him, besides maybe Ricky Pearsall right now, that's young. Right. So like, what are they really, how are they really building that? So that's where I think like an unexpected complete shift of a rebuild mode for the 49ers could make a ton of sense. And that would probably be spearheaded with trading a guy like Brock Purdy.
That was good. I like that, actually. If you're going to rebuild, then rebuild completely, right? Don't overpay your quarterback you don't think you're going to be able to, come out to the promised land with.
Yeah, is Brock Purdy going to carry a franchise that only has Brandon Ayuk, that doesn't, like, is he going to carry that team? No, absolutely not, right? It's a system, Shanahan's system. So that's why I think is incredibly intriguing. If they do make that trade, then who knows, man? Who knows? Who knows what will happen with Kirk and Sam Darnold at that point? But free agency starts tomorrow. So as of midnight of tonight, we should be starting to hear signs with. So I am super excited, man. I'm really excited to see where Sam Darnold goes, because that's going to completely help put all of the rest of the pieces in the NFL together. So super excited about that. But that is it for all of you guys. Free agency, quarterback predictions. What do you guys think? Are we completely far-fetched, or are we going to hit all of these, Shove It, and look like absolute gurus? If you're watching, hit the like, hit the subscribe, spreads the word. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok is where our socials are at The Only Playbook. I'm Sweetcar. That's my Twitter handle. And that is Shove It. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode. We will be back. We are going to do risers and fallers from the NFL Combine as our next episode. So stay tuned. Have a fantastic day. See you guys.